in his time, no question about it, he was the conservative leader in America. I mean, nobody doubted that. I mean, and Jesse was all, you don't say, oh, shucks, and I don't deserve this or that. He never, one of these guys that I really admire that didn't try to take credit for everything that happened in Washington.
Former Senator Bob Dole, former presidential candidate Bob Dole, talking about Senator Jesse Helms, who died today at 86. Here's what the White House, President Bush and the First Lady said about Jesse Helms. Jesse Helms was a kind, decent, humble man and a passionate defender of what he called the miracle of America. So it is fitting that this great patriot left us on the 4th of July. He once asked if he had any ambitions beyond the United States Senate. He replied, "The only thing I'm running for is the kingdom of heaven." Today, Jesse Helms has finished the race, and we pray he finds comfort in the arms of the loving God he strove to serve throughout his life. Thoughts about Jesse Helms, his life and career, Fred?
You know, I knew Senator Helms pretty well. As a matter of fact, I once wrote a piece for the Weekly Standard about him, and on the cover we had a picture of Helms on Mount Rushmore, actually. And you know, yeah, it was a great cover. It was a great cover, but it made liberals mad, made even people like Mort mad. But you know, Helms was just an implacable conservative. He didn't go along to get along. He was in Washington to push what he wanted, and a lot of them were issues that were cultural and social issues that, you know, the Georgetown types didn't want to hear about, you know, abortion and gay rights and particularly racial preferences. Now, the majority of Americans oppose racial preferences. Jesse Helms, you know, put that in an ad, which you showed earlier on Jim Angle's piece, and that just infuriated so many people. But not Ronald Reagan. You know, Ronald Reagan wouldn't have been president without Jesse Helms saving him in North Carolina in '76, which Helms and Tom Ellis, his buddy, did on their own. I mean, they put this ad together from a Reagan speech denouncing the Panama Canal Treaty, put it on the air all over North Carolina, and he won. Big surprise. And then went on to win a lot of other primaries. He didn't beat Gerald Ford for the nomination, but he was put in place to be the nominee in 1980. Of course, we know what happened after that.
When I covered Jesse Helms' race against former Charlotte Mayor Harvey Gantt. He ran against him twice. I covered it in '96. Gantt, obviously an African-American, the race was dealt with race. Yes. And Helms was not short of controversy throughout his career.
Absolutely. Look, he was a personally gracious and courtly man, soft-spoken and all that. Staunch anti-communist, a United Nations reformer and all that. That said, to be balanced, you know, he was not a Dixiecrat. He was a Dixie-publican. You know, he was practically a Confederate. I mean, he was opposed to civil rights legislation. He was opposed to integration. He said that civil rights consisted of taking rights away from some people to give them to others. He was opposed to a Martin Luther King holiday. He tried to filibuster a Voting Rights Act. I mean, you know, there are plus things you can say about him, but unfortunately, on his day of his death, you could also see some negative things.
Well, I just point to a couple of events that bookended his 30-year career in the Senate. Fred's already mentioned his role in reviving the Reagan campaign, and we might not have had a President Reagan without Jesse Helms' events. The year before that, 1975, he pressured Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, President Gerald Ford, his own party, about not allowing Alexander Solzhenitsyn to be interviewed in the White House. They thought this would interfere with the policy of détente. The Soviets would get cross with us and so forth. Helms stood up, despite some of those regrettable stands that Mort mentioned, for Solzhenitsyn, for the forces of freedom, and of course that prevailed ultimately in the Cold War. In his last term in office, he worked bipartisan basis with Joe Biden on the Foreign Relations Committee on things like UN reform, but he got particularly involved in in stopping AIDS in Africa and was a major leader in this. And you know, people say that he was antipathetic to black people and so forth. His motive was, as a Christian, he felt he had to save children's lives, and that was two big impacts.
Last word. That's it for the panel, but stay tuned. It's not the 4th of July without this one particular contest.